Welcome to our visiting critic lecture at Anderson Ranch. I want to welcome everyone in person and our virtual participants as well. I'm Liz Farrell, director of our Artist in Residence program. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. I'm going to do the same right now. To begin, Anderson Ranch would like to acknowledge that our campus resides on a traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people, who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Now, it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Ranu Mukherjee. Ranu makes hybrid work in painting, moving image, and installation to build new imaginative capacities. She is exhibited nationally and internationally, including commissioned projects for the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, De Young Museum, Karachi Biennale in 2019, Los Angeles County Museum of Contemporary Art, San Francisco Arts Commission, San Jose Museum of Art, Singapore Biennial in 2022, and Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Recent awards include a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, a Lucas Visual Arts Fellowship at Montalvo Art Center, and residencies at 18th Street Art Center, Los Angeles, and 836M in San Francisco. She was represented by Gallery Wendy Norris, who published her first monograph, Shadow Time, in 2021. She's a co-founder of media collective Orphan Drift and chair of film at California College of the Arts. Please join me in welcoming Ranu.
Hello. Thank you so much, Liz, Meriwether, Emil, for being such great hosts. And I had such a good time in the studios today. So thanks to all of you for sharing your work and for being here to help me share mine. And I'm looking forward to it tomorrow, too. It's really amazing to be here. Today I'm gonna talk, mainly focus on work that I've made since 2015, which was kind of a moment of change for me. But the talk is also gonna be somewhat elliptical, dipping into some precursor work. I tend to work in an elliptical way and also in constellations of content and materials. So hopefully the talk is a reflection of that practice. I'm starting with this word, which is shadow time, and it is written on a blackboard at the De Young Museum where I was in residence in December of 2016. The word itself I made in 2015 with the artist Alicia Escott, who is the one of the co-founders of the Bureau for Linguistical Reality, which is a project that helps us make words for things that we don't, for feelings that we don't yet have words for. So shadow time manifests as a feeling of living in at least two distinctly different temporal scales simultaneously, or the acute consciousness of a possibility that the near future will be drastically different than the present. And for me, that sort of manifested for a long time in this feeling that like I have these really everyday ambitions, coupled with a sense in the shadows that like none of them might matter. We might have to change our entire way of living due to climate change or political realities, things like that. When I made the work, it was 2015, so we were leading up into the 2016 elections. So there was a lot of feeling of instability, and it was really amazing to be able to name this feeling. I feel like it's become since not so much a shadow. It's a lot less shadowy than it was at the time, but it was really an exciting thing to be able to make the word. This is the website of the Bureau for Linguistical Reality. They do a lot of these words, and I think they're really worth checking out if that is of interest. And that word became something that helped me focus the work. At the time, I sort of felt like I needed to really work in a present tense. Not that, I mean, my work has always responded to the world around me, but I was also working with a lot of different historical stuff. And at that time, I was like, okay, like I really have to deal with the present somehow. And also, I think a lot about the way that the future speaks to us in the present and what we can do to sort of shift those narratives or move them in a direction, or what's happening that moves them in a direction that might be more beneficial. So it became the title of a solo show I had at Gallery Wendy Norris in 2017. It was my third solo show with the gallery. And this is a video installation called Mixing Dusts. It's a projection on glass that's set onto this concrete platform, and so it's two-sided and it can be walked around. So it's a sculpture as well as a video. And it started at the de Young Museum. The residency there at the time was a residency where people would come into your studio while you were working. And so it was almost as if you were on display. So, of course, I wanted to do something with that experience where there was something for the audience to do other than watch me paint. And so I set up a green screen and I had people roll in pairs or threes on the ground. I wanted to do something that was like about intimacy and the awkwardness and awkwardness, and this idea of like being connected to the ground, because I was thinking a lot about unstable ground. And so in the video, the ground in the video constantly changes into different things, whereas the rolling continues, and it's these different pairs of people rolling. That show also included, and this is another thing that started at that residency. And so talking to you, like, who are you all in it? You're in a residency. And I realized when I was preparing this that I started thinking about how generative different, like working in different environments has been for me. So one of the things that I was doing at that time as a sort of alternative documentary practice was I was tracing news images on tracing paper, and it was a way for me to relieve like some of the anxiety around some of the stuff that was happening. And I kept doing that because I just couldn't like peel myself away from the news. And when I got to the studio at the de Young, I had this piles of tracing paper that were just on the table, and I noticed them in overlays and thought, oh, there's something interesting about that. So I started making these paintings on paper that were different scales, but like combining these different images. So this one is called Love in Shadow Time, and it's an image of people reuniting in the airport after the travel bans, the Larson B ice shelf cracking, and some people who worked in the bodegas in New York having a prayer protest in the streets. This one is called Carving Out Space Time. I'm just going to go through some of these because I can't talk about every single image just for the sake of time, but this is Cracks, and this was an image of the fluorescent orange line, which is a little hard to see in projection, is an image of some protesters lying on a train station in New York City protesting the killing of Eric Garner by police chokeholds. And there is our officers like watching over the protest. And then again, the Larson B ice shelf cracking. So the painting is called Cracks. And I was thinking a lot about watershed moments. And often when I'm painting something that has to do with violence or protest, it's always the image of people standing in the place of a collective action rather than the action of violence itself that I'm representing. They also became more entangled, so I was thinking a lot about entanglement and how these images overlay on each other. This is called Body Language, and it includes a lot of different performative images and some also mythological images. This one's called Something About Moving Palms Across Oceans. And this one is Beginnings. And Beginnings was an overlay of a bunch of images of people who had been refugees coming to the United States that were then going to Canada and being arrested at the border on purpose to claim refugee status because they were feeling unsafe here. So a very fast transition of two different kinds of refugees. These are all paintings on paper that were about 5 feet wide. And the background colors are important. You'll see in most of the paintings that I make that I never work on white. And so I consider the color in the ground to be an animate force and a space that is kind of like a place for me. So considering something other than white as the ground of the work. This is some images of the install of that show. So moving on to 2018, this is a project called Succession, which was made for the DeRosa Center for Contemporary Art, which is in Sonoma. And I was invited to be part of this project called Be Not Still, Living in Uncertain Times, and we were asked to choose a word, which was a really odd thing, but they wanted a word that was really like a kind of issue that was happening that was really accessible. And so I figured out what the project was before I figured out the word. The word ended up being health, but this was one of the. For a while I'd been doing small projects with a choreographer named Hope Moore, and this was a project where I got to start to collaborate a little bit more in depth with her. And as you'll see, that collaboration has become pretty substantial. But for this project, I went up to the land and did a site visit and. This was the site where there was a bunch of fires in 2017. So it was really near where a lot of land in California burned. A town burned down, and the site it's an art center, and so the fire had burned just to the buildings, and so a lot of the earth was singed by the fires. And I decided I wanted to work with the concept of health and work with these dancers to improvise in the remains of the fires. And we were able to shoot this film in April when the rains had come after many years of drought also. So there was a sense of like there was a sense of rebirth through this really bright green grass combined with the charcoaled remains. And then the dancers were sort of improvising but also getting this charcoal on them. And so I was trying to think about this idea of like, I guess Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble, or how do you do something that is staying present with things when they're difficult? How do you live in aftermath? And the floor was based on a photograph by Judy Dater, which I think is in this presentation somewhere. So I can talk about that in a bit. There were chunks of the remains of the fires on the floor, and we also staged a performance within the space. And this was, again, a video that was shown in the round, so projected onto two sides of a screen in the middle of a space. And then I also had the walls around it painted different shades of gray up to different heights. And so that was to mark the way that if you look at a landscape that's been burned by a fire, you can see the levels of the trees. The burn on the levels of the trees shows you where the fire moved. And I was making these drawings that included different kinds of cataclysmic events that happened that same year in other places in the world. So typhoons in Bangladesh, for instance. And these were all charcoal drawings on the wall. This was like one of the only times that I've worked in black and white for a while. And then I made some other work on paper based on these drawings after working directly on those wall murals. And these were all like plants, animals, and people from that time overlaid onto these paper. Oh, the Judy Dater photo is not there. I guess I forgot to save it. Judy Dater made this photo called Self-Portrait with Steam Vent. And so that floor was a dance floor. It was a Mylar dance floor, but it was based on this photo of her standing above a steam vent that she made in 1982. So there was a little bit of relationship like to land art and to her photography, which is part of that collection. So this project was also a really foundational, important transformative kind of project. This was called A Bright Stage at the DeYoung Museum. This went up in 2018, was up for about 6 months, I think. And this is a publicly accessible atrium in the middle of the DeYoung Museum. And so they're curating, the curator there, Claudia Schmuckley, is curating different projects for this space. But it was a really exciting invitation. She called me and asked me if I would take on the space because it's a really challenging space. And I immediately started to think about the banyan tree because I happened to be in India when she called. So I made this big project. Those pieces, that middle wall is 50 by 30 feet, so you get a sense of the scale. It was the largest scale project I've done. And those pieces are pieces of linen with textile collage on them. And then there's a 9-channel video in the middle of the installation. I just want to take a little detour into the past because I started realizing about this time that there's been trees in my work for a long time. This is me a couple weeks ago at an opening at the San Jose Museum of a show that is called Points of View, I can't remember the title of the show, but it's a show about time. It's a collection show. And so this piece from 2012 is in that show, and it was the first time that I'd printed on sari cloth. I made this tree of life image, printed on sari cloth, and also in this video. And this was a piece that was all about the way that the Valley of Heart's Delight changed to Silicon Valley. So the agricultural economy transformed into a technological economy. And so in this tree, over time in this video, these solar panels appear in the boughs of the tree, and the sun is going in the other direction. It goes from the sky down, and then it starts going from the ground up. And so thinking about energy and power and where it comes from, and what does that say about the future. So that was a big project called Telling Fortunes, but the Tree of Life, which is the title of that print on sari cloth, was a really one of the many times I've used trees in the work. Previously before this. And so sometimes you do things that you don't, it's like the idea doesn't fully realize until much later. The banyan tree became this significant figure, and with the DeYoung show, I wanted to make the banyan tree like the protagonist in the work. So what does it mean to make work where there's a non-human protagonist, which is something I've also been doing for a long time, but not maybe thinking about it so clearly. So the banyan tree is such a huge tree that this is like a historical image of a market under the tree, using the tree as shade. This is one tree near Calcutta, which is a park, and so the tree takes up this huge amount of space that becomes a public park. I was thinking about public space because that space of the museum is a public space where people don't have to pay to get into the museum. And also the banyan tree is significant in India. It's a sacred tree, but also the British were hanging people in the rebellion when the country was trying to fight for its independence from British rule. And so the tree, this is a shrine to one of the revolutionaries in a tree. And the tree is a biological plant that it's expansive from it basically colonizes a host tree, and it grows outwards and then down with these prop roots, but it also strangles and hollows out the host. And so it became this really interesting metaphor for speaking about the legacy of colonialism as much as the ecological situation. And I like to make work where you can't pull apart nature and culture, where those two things are inseparable, because I think that's a kind of important perspective. So this is a close-up of two of the sort of fragments of the tree. And of course, the tree was not very literally rendered in these pieces. There were line drawings of different kind of things that were going on. So I was thinking a lot about public voices. These are some migrants that were waiting on the border. There were a lot of line drawings of different things that were happening in the time in the public media. And then there was this sari cloth, and the sari cloth, this was the first time that I started to use sari cloth as a collage material instead of being the substrate for a print, which is something I'd been thinking about doing for a long time, but this commission really just threw me into that process. And so I started to print patterns on already printed fabric and also to draw these line drawings. And so on the left, you see there's an image of a water protector, and there's a pattern that's made out of images of water protectors printed onto the cloth. And so the way I would do that is like, this is an image of the Women's March. this is a pattern I made from that image. So really abstracting those images, a little bit like the shadow time drawings. One of the other things I think about a lot is the way images have a temporality in the media, and I like to kind of try to remove things from that temporality to look at them from a different temporal point of view. So either by like overlaying them and taking out the demographic information, like in those shadow time drawings, or like this, where these actions and activity and sort of movements, acknowledging that they exist even when we're not seeing them in the media. So they continue to work even when they're not visible. This is Jamdani cloth. This is just a close-up of the cloth. Jamdani cloth is a cloth that I work with a lot, again from Bengal, and it is a cloth that really mimics the screen in the sense that it's a really thin weave with thick embroidery on top of it. And when I first started working with textiles, I was trying to find something to print on that would mimic the screen, because I was making a lot of these videos that I wanted to make a kind of like relationship between the screen and the fabric. The video that was in that in A Bright Stage has its own title. It's called The Dead and the Wild, and that video is made up of images of 9 species of extinct birds. And the video, these are the birds sort of all fragmented, and eventually in the video they come together and form, and they're still images of the bird sitting statically upside down, staring out at the audience. And part of where this came from was that I found out that Michael DeYoung actually had a collection of stuffed birds that he didn't know what to do with, and that's how he became a museum person. It's part of the origin story of the museum. But the DeYoung Museum itself, so the birds aren't there because he didn't find funding for the museum in time, so he sold them to somebody else. But the bird, the museum itself is a museum that has a kind of 19th century legacy of collecting objects from all over the world. There's a European, the Legion of Honor, which is part of the same institution, has a European wing, but the DeYoung has these objects from all over the world. And I think I was making this around the time the Black Panther was made, so thinking a lot about these objects in museums, and thinking also about this question of like, can these extinct birds continue to speak to us even after they are no longer alive through images? Which is parallel to the way the objects in a museum that have been taken out of a culture might speak. This video went to the Karachi Biennial in 2019 and was staged in this empty cage in the Karachi Zoo, which was really amazing because it was in a neighborhood where it was very clear in the install. There was a lot of different biennial projects in this zoo. It was an ecologically themed biennial, but also a biennial that was where it was important that a lot of the work was out in the public sphere, in a place where a lot of people had never seen public art. So it was really amazing opportunity to show work in a place where people were just beguiled by the form or seeing something different. And the zoo itself was like a community space. So I was there installing on Women's Day, where like a lot of women came with their children and had this some sense of freedom that like they may not always have in other contexts. And it was really fun. They were like all taking selfies, and it was really inspiring to be in a place where public art isn't such a known quantity. And it's also now up, I think, in a show it may have just come down, but there's a show called Future Shock that was at the Roswell Museum. So this is an example of the piece staged in a museum apart from the way it was originally seen within the context of the whole Bright Stage installation. So this is Montalvo Center for the Arts. I actually just came from there. I arrived here from just coming off a residency there. It's a 3-year engagement with them. And originally I had proposed a project to them before the pandemic, and I went there, started my residency right before lockdown. And so I was there when the lockdown happened, around a table like you are here with people that I didn't know before. And when I came back to my studio, studio after that, there was a sign on my wall that said this. And it was really interesting because I was thinking about this idea of rupture and how rupture could be a form of expertise. What if could the experience of rupture be a form of expertise? And part of my proposal was to do this set of workshops with Hope to lead into a performance and film project, which would bring a group of immigrant and refugee artists through a set of workshops that were about imagining rupture as a character. And we did that through writing, drawing, and movement exercises. And it was not a storytelling workshop in the sense that we did not ask people to tell their stories. They could write them down if they wanted. But it was about how do you imagine rupture having a character of its own, and what has it taught you? And so it was kind of a speculative fiction project of sort of using material from your life as a sort of fictional domain, but also tapping into your own expertise. I think that the expertise that comes from having to invent one's life is something that reinvent one's life is something that, like, I feel like it's a futuristic thing that we may all need. And so these workshops were really exciting to do, to sort of exercise that idea. Everyone who participated in the workshops were paid. And so it was a project where we needed to raise money to do it. This was the first pilot one that we did during the pandemic outside. And then since we've done some more of these in Oakland and in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles with an organization that I've continued to work with. I'm going to skip this because it's a lot, but this is a video called Breach that was made, I think in 2014 as part of the Extracted trilogy that I made. It was a project about the Chinese Exclusion Act and the gold rush and mythology around that and around speculation in California. But it was literally about a breach. And so this video was made, it's the first part of a trilogy, and it was made in relation to this cave. I was standing in front of this cave when I learned for the first time about the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this cave is a cave that, like, when you think cave, you see this in your head, but it's actually made by the blast of a hydraulic mining event. So thinking about these created events. And so in the video, it starts with this explosion and ends with the pieces coming back together to form the cave. So that's, again, another example of where these themes come from the past. So, like, sometimes I think, oh, I've been making work about rupture for a really long time, actually, and I didn't realize it. So after I did that show, let me just do a time check. Where am I? Okay. So after I did that show at the De Young and came back to my studio, and I'm kind of like meandering around lots of different bodies of work, but I came back to my studio, and that project at the De Young was, like, remarkably fast for the scale it was, and I felt like I had just started to work with both the banyan tree and these birds, and also to really dig into what I could do with this fabric. And so I kept working like that on sort of more standard paintings. This is a 8 by 6 foot painting called Crowded Dreams, or How the Dead Speak, and it incorporates the birds. I started to think about, like, making these sort of speculative fiction paintings about the tree in different scenarios, and working on compositions and working really closely with the fabric. So again, like, all the fabric is printed with these patterns that I'm making of different kinds of activist actions, which I consider to be like futurist actions for a future I like to see. So it's a bit like making a prayer, but people don't necessarily know that from seeing the work. And those patterns kind of interact with the patterns in the cloth. This piece is called Dear Future, which ended up being the title of the exhibition I have up in Los Angeles right now. This is about sort of me trying to clean and get my nails done and be surrounded by extinct birds at the same time. So it's like a sort of a self-portrait. And I'm also kind of look like a tree in the piece, I think. I am the mother of triplets, and so I think about, I'm in this situation of, like, thinking about multitasking a lot, or multi-being or something like that. And I think the futurism that I think about also has a lot to do with being a parent of people and thinking about a younger generation. This one is medium, so just a picture of like a painting that involves just the birds. And again, these colors, when I make these works, I work with powdered pigment, and so the color is really important as an environment to me. And what you can't see in the images is that the color, the background, I use crystallina so that the color kind of shimmers in the light, and so the paintings look a bit different from different angles. This piece is called Cut on the Bias, which is this idea of the bias in fabric being a part of the cloth that makes the fabric more flexible. And so thinking about, like, instead of the vertical and the horizontal, there's this diagonal, which is about sort of freedom and flexibility. This piece is an image of my daughter braiding my hair. It comes from an image of my daughter braiding my hair, but also the tree is, our bodies and the tree are kind of merged. And so the prop roots of the tree become the hair, and the bodies and the tree become. And again, like, these fabrics are all sari cloth that's printed. This one is called 2 Centuries Emerging from the Hollows of a Strangled Host. And in this piece, I was trying to kind of really think about that way that the tree strangles its host, and these 2 figures coming out of that history. And so one is a mythological image that has a penis. So and then one is a image of a boy walking up the U.S., like coming across the southern border of the U.S., but he has horse feet. And so there's this, like, again, real mythology sort of hybrid. The work, I think, is hybrid in so many different ways. This one is called Futurism, and this is a pregnant woman upside down in the boughs of the banyan tree. So I wanted to make one piece that was, like, deliberately about motherhood as a form of futurism, thinking about motherhood in a more expansive sense, like whether you're a mother or not. And then this one, the fabric sort of morphed into being part of this train carriage. So I went to Karachi for the biennial, and most of my family can't go to Karachi because of what happened during partition. So people with Indian passports that live in it can't go to Pakistan and reverse. And so since I grew up here, I was able to go to Pakistan, and I bought a lot of Indian fabric in Pakistan, which I use the fabric as a kind of emblem of diaspora as well, of the body and whether it can move across borders or not. And then this is like an image of a train, which the trains in Pakistan and India are the same trains. But there was a lot of violence on those trains during partition. So thinking about that legacy, and the train image became kind of like the image of the tree for holding those histories. And then through the window, which also looks like a computer screen, is an image of my 3 kids. So there's like this crossing of temporalities in the piece for me. That was also a cover of my monograph, and the title is Shadow Time. So this is a monograph that takes through my work through 2020 and talks a lot about this kind of relationship between moving image and painting. That my gallery, that was my COVID project instead of having a show. The fabric has also become part of what I do when I'm working in public art situations. This was a piece made for a Facebook commission, and trying to find the title because I can never remember the title of that piece. It's called When Change Moves Like the Forest Think. And then this is the piece that I made for the San Francisco airport. This is a permanent public commission made almost entirely out of the fabric. So the fabric collage is made, you can see details of it. And this is called When the Path Through the Atmosphere is Longer, which is a sort of reflection again on time, and being in like a situation where you see multiple sunsets or sunrises in the same day. And it's between glass and metal, so printed metal and glass. So it's fun to make public work because it sort of goes to a different audience. Then at the end of that body of work, I made this piece, which is called Badass Lament, Rosa Rosa. And this started me working with forests. So the tree kind of became a forest. And also because of the pandemic, I was sort of starting to think about still life and how like still life and landscape aren't really that separate. And that whatever is a hair clip that I had. I felt like this was sort of like a feminist piece about whatever being a really positive and a really, I don't know, just the state of mind that was at the time. But it was also that forest is based on this drawing by Rosa Rosa, who was a futurist artist. There was there's like not very much scholarship on the women who were in the futurist movement, but some of them were like arguing at the time with the version of male futurism that sort of led into the fascist, Italian fascism. And so there's this link between some of the male futurist thought and fascism. And so I was thinking about like the parallels between the time we're in now and sort of how to think about like how to like sort of steer clear, or what do you do when you have like a potential fascism on your hand. And this is a painting called Forest, which was made many, many years ago. Again, like a sort of foreshadowing of all of the work that to come. This was a collaged painting on paper that I think was made in 14 maybe. So then the show that I have right now up concludes the rest of the work I'm going to show, where I went into this idea of the forest. Coming from the banyan tree, I went into like making images of forests. This one is called What We Lose Is All Around Us, and was definitely a response to COVID. There's some like acupuncture marks in the middle of it that are about these like liver points, and so the body shows up in different ways. There's mangrove, banyan, kapok, and bamboo. So the forests in these pictures are often plants that like might not necessarily go together, although kapok can live with banyan because of the thorns, so that it doesn't get taken over. And thinking a lot about mangrove as something that like sucks up a lot of carbon. But the idea being also that this idea again of like things that are lost are also still here in some way, thinking about what would be remembered from the time of the pandemic. These drawings are called breath drawings, and those are on paper. They're smaller drawings, which are of different objects floating above hands. So there was this whole thing about not being able to touch anything, and I realized how important like tactile things were for me. My daughter was making a lot of cakes at the time to give to her friends so that she could sort of deliver a cake as a way of seeing her friend. And so there are cakes and then the birds floating. And that paper is made because I print through the fabric. A lot of the ink goes right through when I'm printing on fabric. And so we put down paper underneath, and it's on a flatbed. And so the patterns come through on the paper. So I have this paper as a layer to paint on. This is called Where We Live. So this is sort of about, eroticism that's sort of trapped. And again, like this, what would a still life be if I was making still life, which I feel like is a really unusual genre for me. This is like about 5 foot square, I think. Unsettling the gravity of assumptions. This is another like merging with the tree image, and it's got mango, lemon, fig, and olive, which are sort of have healing properties in different cultures, and again like hybrid of a sort of like Asian and European base of things, which a lot of the work sort of merges those cultural roots. This one is called Attuning. I started to put microphones and megaphones in the work as a way of talking again about listening. So like with a bright stage where I was talking about public voice and action, thinking about listening and listening to the plants. This one is called critical night length, which is a term that has to do with the way plants measure time. And so I started getting this flower that's in that painting showed up in my studio one day. It's a giant flower called Astapelia gigantea, and it blooms when the light starts to wane in October. And so I was interested in this idea of like a plant blooming when there's less light, but triggered by the light specifically as a kind of code that's in its body. And critical night length is the sort of like the name for that sort of plant knowledge. And there's all kinds of different references in this work. But again, this tiger that's like sort of trapped under the table in a hybrid jungly space. And this one's called Nocturne. This became a really important painting. This is mine and my children's hands in what is like a night forest. So all the forests are night blooming plants. And that painting was really important when we went to the next stage of this forest project with Hope Moore. We did a residency at 836 Montgomery in San Francisco, where we had started doing these same workshops that we were doing around rupture, but with this idea of imaginary forests. And so we had 3 people from the workshops join 3 professional dancers, and we had 3 months, and we worked again with drawing, movement, and writing, but we did a lot of specific work about imagining forests, and we mapped those, like the tape on the floor was like mapping individual people's forests, and so everybody was from a different place in the world, and so their forests looked really different. And we talked a lot about what that meant, and we would go in and do these forest meditations every day, thinking about the way that the forest changes every day, because it's like an internal space, but also a space that is kind of on the front lines in terms of survival and indigenous struggle right now. So trying to kind of really think about inside and outside in an expansive way, and the body. And so we worked for 3 months. We made a bunch of choreography. We also shot the choreography in a green screen, which became a film. And let me see how I'm doing for time. Okay, I'm going to show this 5-minute film, and then I'll be almost done. This is an excerpt from a 20-minute 2-screen installation that is on view right now in Los Angeles and Singapore. So that was jumping through a bunch of scenes from the film, but that was like jumping through at different places in the film. All of those bird songs were extinct birds. That the choreography was set to some of the archival recordings of those birds. This is an image. These are just some installation shots of the exhibition, and then a couple of the references that are in the film that are also in these paintings. Again, these are large scale, like 6 by 8 foot paintings. The microphones show up again, but these sticks. When I went back to my studio to make the film from the green screen footage, because in the performance, the performers were working from their own forests. Well, when I came back to my studio, I needed to kind of meditate on the forest for myself, both internally but also externally. And so a couple of the references that show up in these paintings, these figures with sticks, or suggestions of figures with sticks, are from the Tengapali, which is a group of women that protect the forests in Odisha from the loggers. So they go on nightly patrols. And then the other side is like, I grew up in New England, so I was thinking a lot about the crucible and the way that for the Puritans, the forest was a space of evil, but also a space where like women went to dance, and like there were rituals that took place there that by African Americans that couldn't happen anywhere else. And this is called American Black Cherry. The furniture is from a black cherry piece of furniture because it was a tree that was being harvested a lot during that time. So this one's like a little bit of a darker space. And then I made this sculpture. I never make a sculpture, but I made this sculpture because the bags were such an important motif in the performance and the film. And I wanted to have this representation of that in the show. So I used the fabric to make this bag sculpture, which is full of black oil sunflower seeds and chains. And this is the way that it works in the show. And then there's a whole room full of these prints, which are quotes from the different cast members' forests, because I wanted the project as well as the work that came out of the project to be represented. So this kind of represents the mentality of the project. And I have the voices of the cast and the choreographer there in the show, which is really nice. And then the project is also in the Singapore Biennial right now, and it's staged in this capsule on the Singapore Flyer, which is a giant Ferris wheel. And there's vinyl on the vinyl of some of the images is on the surfaces of the flyer, but also the videos are playing there. So when people are up above the city, they're watching this meditation on the ground from above. So hopefully that creates some sort of a conversation. And I will stop there because it's 6:22 and I've gone a little bit over my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can take some questions now. If you have questions, just wait for the microphone to get to you so folks online can hear your question.
Hey, so you mentioned that you usually don't work on a white background. Mm-hmm. And so how do you make your choice for the color of the background? And is there a certain statement or philosophy behind it?
Thank you for that question. It's a pretty intuitive process, but I do make a bunch of, I make the supports. I get a whole body of work done. I mean, the grounds done at the same time. So when I start a body of work that's painting, I will start with a group, a size and a shape of a group of, I paint on linen panels, and I put down the colors. And it's pretty intuitive. It's not symbolic. I tend to use colors that are very mixed, so fairly organic in themselves, and that they're sort of between things. But it's I don't know. I allow myself to be pretty intuitive about that. Like I see those colors, and I think I just make these combinations. I think it's a mood thing or an environment that I'm trying to create with a specific body of work. Yeah. but I don't, it's like a sort of refusal of white as a ground, but I also do think of color as being alive. So I think it's very much like what's alive to me at that moment in my imagination.
I love the forest, so fun. It looked like such a fun project, all those people doing that. You said earlier at the start of the pandemic, there were people interpreting that. Were those different dancers and writers, or do you enlist people from the residency you were at in terms of making the forest project?
So at the beginning, that first pilot workshop was done at Art Together, which is an organization based in Oakland, California that works with immigrant and refugee artists to support them. And so we did the workshop specifically with that organization and put out a call for this opportunity, which was like a workshop, but also a paid opportunity to work with this material. And sort of my hope with them is that the material is generative for all of the participants as well as for me. I mean, it's like a kind of exchange. So those participants, out of that, there was that pilot workshop, and then we did another set of workshops. We did a 3-part workshop a year later, which was really digging into this idea of rupture as a character, and it was called Imaginative Future. So it went rupture as a character, and then resilience was the second part, and imagining futures was the third part. We did that both in San Francisco, in Oakland, and in Los Angeles at the 18th Street Art Center, where my exhibition Dear Future is staged. And so we did the workshops at both of those places. Both of them, the call out was for immigrant and refugee artists, although we also asked for people who were having some kind of a life change. And so it was a little bit more fluid in LA. Like there was a different set of parameters on the workshops. Then from the Oakland workshops, we invited 3 artists to join in the film and performance project. So the cast for that project was built out of using 3 people from those workshops and then 3 professional dancers, because some of the choreography is dance choreography, and some of it is like this kind of more movement, performative movement. So that's where the cast comes from, and then we're going to re-perform. We made it's an hour-long performance. We're restaging it for the exhibition in Los Angeles that will go up in February when the Frieze Art Fair is on, and so there'll be these kind of gallery activations with segments of the performance, but performed by the same cast. And then we're also doing another set of workshops in Los Angeles that are called Imagining Forests. So taking what happened in the second part of the project and bringing it back to Los Angeles. So it's been really amazing to have these ongoing collaborations with institutions. Like in 18th Street, I did a residency there and workshops and this exhibition, and they're all kind of like just informing each other. So yeah, so there are participants in the workshop that take the material they make home with them, and we don't work with all of them later, but some of them we do.
Thank you very much. Oh, we have one more. Right here.
Hi, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of the banyan tree to you and like the experience of figuring out that it was so important, that it was always there?
Sure. Well, I think it's a fascination. I mean, okay, so my father grew up in India, so there's a lot, the hybrid in the work is that I have a hybrid cultural background, and he also passed away when I was very young, so there's some things about that culture that are like sort of fascinating, almost as an outsider. But I think my fascination with the tree is because it's a tree that creates a whole environment. Like it is the host of all of these species, as well as strangling the host of it. And so I think that is personally the story. I mean, I don't know if there's a gap between like my fascination with that the sort of culture of the tree and my personal relationship with it. I mean, I have also been in places where I've been in that park. It's not far from where my father grew up. And so I have been around them, and I've thought of them as figures, but I think the personal part of it is like I got this call when I happened to be at a family wedding in India, and when I imagined that space, I automatically imagined the banyan tree. And I think it's about like also this way of thinking about like collectivity and collective space before before doing this work, and I still work in this collective formation called Orphan Drift. And so for many years, I worked under another name, and that was another situation of like working with other people in a way that sort of subsumes part of you, and so, but also generates in a different way. And I think that the relationship between individual and collective culture is really important right now. So I don't know. I feel like it's a tree that has this sort of such a multi-layered history and being and presence, and it's a spiritual tree. Like it's a sacred tree. So I feel like the combination of all of those things is what it means to me. I hope that answers your question. I don't know. It's like I don't make a huge distinction between like the personal and that set of interests.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Time to eat. Thank you.